In our previous episode detailing the heady days of the Second Age of Middle-earth, we discussed the war between Sauron and the Fair Folk, which culminated in the timely arrival of the Numenorians to the aid of their elven allies. Although Sauron was soundly defeated in this conflict, he would survive and adapt to the situation he now found himself in. Indeed, a change of tact would be required for this would-be Dark Lord to assume the role long maintained by his former master, Morgoth. As the sheer might of Numenor could not be matched on the field of battle, the kingdom's downfall would have to come from within. As the Second Age progressed ever onwards, the greed of men, catalyzed by the avarice and cruelty of Sauron, would ensure this event came to pass. We know that ultimately a band of heroes would achieve a long-awaited victory over Sauron, but you needn't wait to see your own collection of heroes win glory with a certain game that has sponsored this video. It's a game where you can collect over 800 champions to face deadly challenges and bosses, and this winter, why not expand your roster with some wintry warriors to fit the mood? Willem Frostking's a great choice if you want to see what Sauron would look like after 5 minutes in the snow, a perfect support character for the early game too. Or take someone who looks more at home in winter, Glycea Soulguide, who will debuff your enemies and protect you from moves that increase your cooldowns, ironically enough. If you didn't notice, we're talking about Raid Shadow Legends, where collecting all the heroes you can is both tactically advantageous and beautiful to behold. There's now a massive new update, adding the Cursed City. It's the biggest challenge since the Doom Tower, with 100 stages to complete, some featuring dual boss fights that really test your tactics. If you don't have it already, get the game for free on PC or mobile via our link in the description, or use the QR code on screen. Either way grants access to a bonus pack that includes not one but 2 epic champions. First you get Lightsworn, who buffs defenses and revives your fallen heroes. Then at level 15, you also get Juliana, the boss killer, who will handle your enemies with ease. Once you're in, come join us here in the Kings and Generals clan to get extra benefits and progress through quests together. See you on the battlefield. Although the intervention of the Numenorians in the War of the Elves and Sauron marks the crowning achievement of Tar Minastyr's reign, it also represented the high watermark of Numenorian wisdom. For although Tar Minastyr's successor, Tar Cíartan, was highly ambitious and expanded Numenor's power and wealth by orders of magnitude, the cracks in the facade had already begun to emerge. As the continued large-scale colonization of Middle-earth continued, it brought out the great greed which lay at the heart of man. The middle men of the mainland were effectively held as thralls of their Numenorian brethren, as they were forced to pay great tribute to their overlords. All the while, the treasury of the island realm grew increasingly full of rare metals and gems, which funded immense hosts of warriors and the construction of mighty armadas. However, it was the reign of Tar Atanamir which marked the true departure of the Numenorians from the wisdom which had so defined their realm up until this point. Tar Atanamir would speak against the Valar, and in particular openly question the ban of the Valar and the necessity of the mortality of men. The Valar, perturbed by the conduct of the King of Numenor, sent ambassadors to soothe the rift which had begun to emerge. However, the king pithily asked them why his mighty forebears, Eärendil and Tuor, were determined worthy to live in Valinor until the breaking of the world, while mortal man was doomed to die. The ambassadors responded that his ancestors' fate was one apart from mortal man, and the Undying Lands were not capable in and of themselves of granting immortality, but were instead named such due to their inhabitants. The king was far from satisfied, and continued to argue against the love of the Valar and Elves which had long dominated Numenor, causing a schism within the Isle. Those who still loved the Elves and continued to receive them in secret became known as the Faithful, or Elendili, while many more came to resent their former allies. Perhaps the greatest indicator of Numenor's moral decline was evidenced within the succession, for Atanamir refused to abdicate, and became the first king to die while still strong in mind and body. The House of Elros, following on from this despotic and unwise reign, endured an ever-dwindling lifespan, and none again would renounce the scepter of Numenor, instead dying atop the throne. The division within Numenorian society was to become more pronounced and effectively irreparable under the reign of Tar and Calamon. During this epoch, the Elendili who initially emerged in Atanamir's reign continued to advocate for devotion towards the Valar, who had rescued their ancestors from the tyranny of Morgoth, and maintaining the bonds of friendship long shared with the elves. In opposition, the king's men followed in the steps of their previous king by continuing to oppose the ban of the Valar and any form of friendship with the elves. Rather, they advocated for the independence and self-determination of Numenor, having witnessed the lofty position of the Isle amongst the denizens of Middle-earth. During the reign of An-Calimon, the elven tongues were openly discouraged and no longer taught to the children of the Isle. However, as a mark of respect for the ancient customs of their people, the royal titles were still taken in Quenya. However, this was not done out of any true love of the Eldar. Further, the great eagles, who had long nested within an eyrie above the king's palace in Armenelos, were no longer fed, and as such departed the island never again to return. The rule of An-Calimon's son, Tar-Telemaite, provided a direct continuation of his father's policies, with a particular emphasis placed upon obtaining Mithril and bringing it back to the island kingdom. Upon his death, his daughter, Tar-Vanemeldi, assumed the throne. Tar-Vanemeldi's reign was dominated by an indifference towards rulership. Rather than attending to matters of state, the queen favoured culture and arts, and left much of the business of ruling to her husband, a nobleman by the name of Herakelmo. Upon Varemeldi's death in SA 2637, the throne should have passed to her son Alcarin. However, as a symptom of the nation's decaying morality, Herakelmo usurped the throne. He would rule for 20 years as Tar Andukal. However, he was not considered legitimate, and no records of his rule persisted, with royal chroniclers recording that Vanemeldi's rule was immediately followed by Alcarin's. Tar Alcarin's reign, bar the impact of the usurpation, was mundane in the extreme. During his tenure, an uneasy peace persisted between the king's men and the faithful. However, as the ignorant opulence of the Numenorians persisted, matters upon the mainland had begun to take a darker turn. Sauron's power had begun to grow exponentially, to the extent that the very mention of his name drove terror into the denizens of the lands which bordered Mordor. While Numenorian power spread throughout Middle-earth, with large settlements being constructed, such as Umbar in the south and the faithful-dominated Pelargir further north, Sauron's servants continued to multiply. It was in these days that the blind eye of Numenor allowed for the Nazgûl to appear and serve their lord in dark and despicable ways. Alcarin was succeeded by his son Tar-Kelmekil, whose reign was barely noteworthy, apart from the fact that he became the first Numenorian king to record an Adunaic equivalent to his name. For in the Numenorian tongue, he was known to his subjects as Arbelzagar, which served to signify the continued alienation of the Numenorians from their elven counterparts. Kelmekil was then succeeded by his son Tar Amadin, who was the last king of Numenor to take their name in Quenya. In private, his followers referred to him as Ar-Abatarik. Tar Adamin's son broke with this most ancient of traditions, rejecting the name Tar Herenumen in favour of the Adunaic Ar-Adunakor, forever ending the usage of Quenya names amongst the rulers of that fair isle. However, the name he chose was considered blasphemous in both languages by many, as it translated to Lord of the West, a title which was reserved for the King of the Valar, Manwë. During Ar-Adunakor's reign, the elven languages were no longer made use of, and nor were they taught to the children of the island. Consequently, boats from Tol Eressëa arrived ever more rarely, while the numbers of the faithful who continued the traditions of old and maintained secret friendships with the elves increasingly dwindled. This was due to the fact that the king had begun to persecute those amongst the faithful, actively punishing all those who openly spoke the elven tongues. The kings who followed would continue the policies which had come to dominate Numenorian politics, which led to a dramatic increase in the power of the king's men and increased persecution of the faithful. Under the reign of the 23rd king of Numenor, Al-Gimilzor, the use of the elven tongues was forbidden upon the island of Numenor. The White Tree was neglected, and the kings of Numenor would never again make a pilgrimage to the Hollow of Eru, despite protests from the Elendili for a return to the policies of old. So distrustful was the king that he moved the faithful from their ancestral home in the haven of Andunii to the secluded eastern edge of the island Romena, where a strict watch was placed upon them. However, in secret, his wife, Inzilbeth, counted herself amongst the faithful and taught her eldest child their ways. Inzilbeth was a descendant of the fourth king of Numenor, Tar Elendil. an aged and wise lineage. However, their second son, Gimilcad, rejected the teachings of his mother and older brother, instead coming to count himself amongst the king's men. Tar Palantir, which meant far-sighted, came to the throne in SA 3177, and also maintained the Adunaic name Arinzilidun, which meant the Flower of the West. He had come to power at a time of great unrest and darkness, which swirled throughout the very fabric of Numenorian society, threatening to engulf it long before the tides ever rose around that fair and storied island. In contrast to his predecessors, who had long since turned from the light of the Valar to focus upon their insatiable greed and the need to create an empire upon the shores of Middle-earth, Tar Palantir sought to save his people from damnation. Tar Palantir repented for the sins of the now deceased kings, taking his name in Quenya, tending once more to the White Tree, and honouring Eru Iluvatar, using the long-neglected ancient practices of earlier kings. Despite this, no response came from the Valar, and the view of Tel Eressëa from the Tower of Tar Minastir remained shrouded. As such, unrest became the defining factor of Tar Palantir's reign, and would also define his succession. Yet even amongst his staunchest enemies and detractors, Tar Palantir was recognised as a peerless seer, who rightly prophesied that the fate which was to befall the White Tree of Nimloth was tied irretractably to that of the House of Elros. Tar Palantir's daughter, Tamiriel, sought to continue this reconciliation, having inherited her father's great wisdom and love of the elves. Alas, this was not meant to be, for in SA 3255, her throne was usurped by her cousin, Ar-Pharazôn, who married Miriel against her will and renamed her Ar-Zimrafel, or High Jewel Daughter. Ar-Pharazôn was the son of Gimilcad, who had led the faction of the King's Men during the reign of Tar Palantir. His pride, in conjunction with the teachings of the King's Men, would lead him far and wide, wherein he would win much renown as a captain of men through the wars waged against the Middlemen. His decision to wed his cousin against Numenorian law and usurp her throne was a direct byproduct of his ever-escalating pride, and he would wield his power with an iron fist. Initially, he persecuted what remained of the faithful. However, his attention was soon drawn to the mainland, as Sauron had begun to call himself the Lord of Men, which necessitated the coming of the King of Numenor to Middle-earth once more. This, however, is a tale for our next video on the history of the Second Age, which will retell the desperate events of the breaking of the Ban of the Valar, the downfall of Morgoth, and the War of the Last Alliance. Special thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Get the game for free via our link below. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the efforts of the new Dark Lord to establish his dominance over all of Middle-earth. But we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi, and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.